The night everything ended didn't feel dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears streaking down my face in front of a mirror. Just clarity. I was standing behind him while he admired himself, adjusting his collar, checking the way his shirt hugged his shoulders. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, something clean and expensive, the kind I used to associate with comfort. For 3 years, I'd learned to mistake familiarity for safety. "You know," he said casually, still focused on himself. "You're so complacent, Emily." I didn't respond right away. He smiled, pleased with the way the word landed. "You're lucky to have me. Other women would kill to be in your place." A pause. "You should be grateful." Be grateful. For years, I'd swallowed comments like that. Little reminders. Small cuts disguised as jokes. A steady erosion of my confidence wrapped in charm and beauty. I had been his designated apologizer, the woman who smoothed things over, who explained him to friends, who told herself love meant endurance. But something about hearing it stated so plainly, so confidently, shifted something inside me. It didn't hurt. It clarified. The anxiety I'd lived with for years didn't spike. It vanished. I met his eyes and smiled. Not a warm smile, not a sad one. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed her exit key. "Then let them try," I said softly. His posture stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, finally turning to face me. "It means you're right," I said, standing up straighter. "Other women would kill to have you." I took a breath. "So I'm done being grateful." The room went quiet. "You're breaking up with me over that?" he snapped. "Because you're insecure?" "No," I replied, already reaching for my bag. "I'm breaking up with you because I'm done shrinking." He laughed then, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You'll come crawling back," he said confidently. "You always do." As I walked toward the door, he delivered his final weapon. Public shame. "Don't forget Liam and Chloe's engagement party on Saturday," he said smugly. "It's going to be embarrassing when you show up alone." I turned back once. "I'll be there," I said calmly. "Don't worry about me." That weekend, I introduced my stunning new date to our entire circle of friends. And that's when his confidence finally cracked. When I met him, I thought confidence looked like certainty. He was charming in the effortless way. Quick smile, sharp humor, the kind of presence that made people lean in when he spoke. We met through friends at a casual dinner, one of those loud, overlapping conversations where no one really listens until someone says something clever. He did. I noticed. He noticed that I noticed. After that night, he pursued me with focus. Texts that came exactly when I was thinking of him. Plans already mapped out. Compliments delivered with precision. I'd dated men who were unsure before, men who hesitated, who drifted. Compared to them, his confidence felt grounding. At first, we moved fast but not recklessly. 3 months in, we were exclusive. 6 months later, most nights ended at one of our places. By the end of the first year, we shared an apartment, the kind with good light in the living room and just enough space to believe you were building towards something permanent. He told people I was easy to be with. I took it as praise. What I didn't realize then was how easily easy could turn into expected. Slowly, without any single dramatic moment, the balance shifted. If he was sharp with someone, I smoothed it over. If he was late, I explained. If he crossed a line, I reframed it for him. He didn't mean it like that. He's just blunt. He's had a stressful week. I became fluent in translation. He liked to tell stories where he was misunderstood, where people were too sensitive, where I, quietly, was the reasonable one who got him. That role felt special, necessary. I didn't notice how often my needs became footnotes. When friends raised eyebrows, I defended him. When my sister asked if I was happy, I said yes, quickly, convincingly. When something in my chest tightened after certain comments, I told myself love wasn't supposed to feel effortless all the time. He never yelled, he never hit, he never made scenes. Instead, he corrected, he teased, he reminded. Reminded me how lucky I was, how many women wanted what I had, how relationships required compromise, especially from women who weren't as driven, as ambitious, as polished. When he succeeded, it was because of his talent. When I succeeded, it was nice. I didn't see it as arrogance then. I saw it as confidence, something I thought I should grow into by proximity. The truth was quieter and more corrosive. I started editing myself before speaking. I learned which moods to avoid, which topics led to subtle punishment, withdrawal, sarcasm, a raised eyebrow that said, "Really?" And yet there were good moments, enough of them to confuse me. Sunday mornings with coffee and no agenda. Private jokes that made me feel chosen. The way he could be generous when he wanted to be. That's the part people never understand from the outside. It's not all bad. It's just conditional. By the time we reached our third year, my role was clear. I was the woman who should be grateful. Grateful he chose me. Grateful he stayed. Grateful he tolerated my complacency. So when he said it out loud that Thursday night, no humor, no disguise, it didn't hurt because it was new. It hurt because it wasn't. It was simply the first time he assumed I'd never leave, and that assumption changed everything. The first warning signs didn't arrive as alarms. They came as suggestions, as jokes, as offhand remarks said with a smile that made it unreasonable to react. He started correcting me in public, not directly, not harshly, just small interjections slipped into conversation. "That's not exactly how it happened," he'd say lightly, fingers brushing my back as if to soften the correction. Or, "What she means is," before I'd finished my sentence. People laughed. I laughed too. I told myself it was nothing, that he just liked things precise, that I was being sensitive. But later, alone, the words replayed. The way my voice had shrunk mid-thought. The way I'd learned to glance at him before finishing a story, checking for approval without realizing I was doing it. He began framing his opinions as facts. Certain friends were bad influences. Certain career choices were short-sighted. Certain outfits were sending the wrong message. When I pushed back, even gently, he never argued. He smiled. "Relax," he'd say. "I'm just trying to help you be your best self." Help! That word carried weight. It made resistance sound ungrateful. The real shift came when he started talking about other women. Not in a cheating way, not explicitly, just comparisons. "She's so driven," he'd say about a coworker. "Women like her don't get complacent. Confidence is attractive. Men notice that." Each comment landed like a measuring tape pulled quietly against my ribs. I told myself it was harmless, that he was just talking. But I noticed how often the word lucky came up. "You're lucky I'm patient. You're lucky I don't mind that. You're lucky I see your potential. Lucky to be chosen. Lucky to be tolerated." I began working harder without meaning to. Dressing sharper, agreeing faster, apologizing preemptively. My life slowly rearranged itself around avoiding that subtle disappointment in his eyes. He never asked me to change outright. He didn't have to. The night before the breakup, we were getting ready for dinner. I remember standing in the doorway watching him fasten his watch, feeling oddly separate from the moment, like I was observing my own life through glass. He caught my expression. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said quickly. He studied me, then shrugged. "You've been a little flat lately." Flat. I didn't know how to explain the exhaustion of constantly being measured, of living inside a relationship where love felt like a performance review. That Thursday night wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. It was just the first time he assumed I'd accept it forever. And that assumption, that I was too invested, too small, too grateful to leave, was the seed he never saw growing. By the time we reached the engagement party weekend, he thought he understood the game completely. What he didn't realize was that I'd already stopped playing my assigned role. I hadn't decided to prove anything. I had decided to stop disappearing. The breakup itself was quiet. No slammed doors, no hysterics, just his certainty crashing into my calm. After I said it, "I'm done being grateful," he laughed, genuinely amused, like I'd just made a dramatic joke that didn't quite land. "You don't mean that," he said, already turning back toward the closet. "You're just having a moment." I watched him the way you watch someone miss a step in the dark. "I mean it," I said. That's when his expression changed. Not to anger yet, but confusion. The kind that comes from a script going off the rails. "You're breaking up with me over a comment?" he scoffed. "That's insecurity, Emily. You should really work on that." I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I reached for my bag and started packing what I needed for the night. That was when the yelling began. I was dramatic. I was ungrateful. I was throwing away the best thing in my life. "You'll regret this," he said loudly, pacing behind me. "You always come back. You know that, right?" I zipped my bag and turned to face him. "I'm not interested in winning anymore," I said. "I just want out." That landed wrong. It wasn't emotional enough. It didn't give him anything to push against. So he reached for the thing that always worked, public shame. "Fine," he said, voice slick with confidence. "But don't forget Liam and Chloe's engagement party on Saturday. It's going to be humiliating for you when you show up alone." He smiled like he'd just placed a checkmate. I paused at the door. "I'll be there," I said calmly. "Don't worry about me." I didn't stay to watch his reaction. I checked into a hotel that night and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, reality kicked in. Not emotionally, but practically. First call, the landlord. The lease was in my name alone. I told him my boyfriend had moved out and I'd be changing the locks on Monday. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He just said he'd update the file. Second call, silence. I stared at my phone, thinking about the party. He wanted me there alone. Small, awkward, a cautionary tale told over drinks. He'd already written the narrative, so I rewrote it. I scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in months. Elliot. We'd met on a work project earlier that year. He was sharp, funny, creative. A graphic designer with an easy laugh and a way of paying attention that didn't feel transactional. There had been a spark, nothing acted on, just noticed. It was a long shot. Me. Hey, Elliot, this is Emily. This is incredibly last minute and totally okay if the answer is no. But my plans for Saturday night just changed dramatically. Any interest in being my +1 to an engagement party? I set the phone down and told myself not to hope. 10 minutes later, it buzzed. Elliot. Emily. My Saturday just went from rewatching a show to intriguing. I'm in. I explained the situation honestly. Long-term relationship. He'd be there. It might be awkward. His response came fast. A little awkward is my specialty. Consider me your social Kevlar. I smiled for the first time since Thursday. Friday passed in a blur of logistics and blocked voicemails. By Saturday evening, when I picked Elliot up, something in my chest felt steady. He opened the door in dark slacks and a crisp shirt, effortlessly put together. No performance, no tension. The drive was easy. Conversation flowed. No edge, no correction. Normal. As we pulled up to the house, I took a deep breath. He thought Saturday would expose me. He didn't realize it was about to expose him. The moment we stepped into the backyard, I felt it. The shift. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses, the low hum of conversations layered over one another. It was familiar territory, a social ecosystem I'd learned to navigate carefully over the years. I hadn't been there 5 minutes before I saw him. He was near the fire pit, holding court the way he always did, mid-story, animated and confident. Sarah and Ben stood close, nodding at the right moments. He hadn't noticed me yet. He was still performing. I felt my pulse pick up, not with fear, but with anticipation. Elliot leaned in slightly. Target acquired at 9 o'clock, he murmured, eyes bright. He's got the brave little soldier look down. I let out a soft laugh. You have no idea. We took the long way around, greeting the hosts first, Liam and Chloe, hugging, congratulating, lingering just enough to be seen. Elliot was effortless, warm, engaged. People gravitated toward him without trying. I felt his gaze before I saw it. When I looked over, his story had died mid-sentence. His smile froze, his jaw slackened. Sarah and Ben followed his line of sight, confusion flashing across their faces as they took us in together. The narrative cracked. He recovered quickly. He always did. His expression reshaped into a brittle smile, and he whispered something to Sarah before starting toward us. Confident stride. Predatory calm. Showtime, Elliot whispered, lifting his glass. Emily, he said brightly, eyes flicking over Elliot in a quick, dismissive scan. You made it. A pause. And you brought a friend. I kept my tone neutral. This is Elliot. Elliot smiled genuinely. So nice to meet you. His smile tightened. Wow, he said lightly. Moving on already? That was fast. Seems a little desperate. He said it just loud enough for nearby conversations to stall. Public shame, his favorite tool. I didn't raise my voice. Not at all, I said calmly. You were very clear on Thursday. You said other women would kill to have you. I smiled. I decided to stop being grateful and let them try. I'm just respecting your wishes. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in an angry flush. That's not what I meant, he hissed. It's what you said, I replied evenly. Clarity is a gift. The toast announcement cut through the tension. I placed a hand lightly at Elliot's back and guided him away. We didn't look back. Later, while Elliot was talking with someone near the bar, Sarah cornered me. This is cruel, she said sharply. He's heartbroken and you show up flaunting someone new. It's disrespectful. I met her gaze. Did he tell you why we broke up? She crossed her arms. He said you overreacted to a comment and threw him out of his own home. His home? I asked quietly. The lease is in my name. She hesitated. And the comment, I continued, was him telling me I should be grateful he allows me to be his girlfriend. He ended it with his words. I just made it official. Sarah faltered. He was just having a bad day. You're supposed to be the bigger person. There it was. The expectation. No, I said firmly. I'm supposed to be happy. His feelings are a consequence of his actions. They're not my responsibility anymore. She didn't argue. She couldn't. As we left later that night, his voice cut through the chatter. "It's pathetic," he said loudly. "Rebounds never last. She'll come crawling back." I didn't slow down. I didn't turn around. For the first time, his narrative had no power over me. The party ended, but the consequences didn't. They multiplied. By Monday morning, my phone was silent, not because there was nothing to say, but because I had blocked him everywhere. The silence felt deliberate, protective, necessary. The messages came anyway. First from Sarah. Long paragraphs about compassion, about how he was struggling, about how I'd embarrassed him publicly and how that wasn't like me. Each sentence carried the same underlying message. Fix this. Make it easier for him. I didn't respond. Then came his mother. Cassandra didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You can't just throw him out," she said coldly when I answered out of habit. "A real woman doesn't act out of hurt feelings. It makes you look weak." Weak. I let the word hang between us. "The lease is in my name," I said evenly. "He moved out." "That doesn't absolve you of responsibility," she snapped. "You funded his lifestyle for years. You don't get to pull the rug out because your ego was bruised." I hung up and blocked her before she could finish the sentence. 2 numbers gone. Then the social media posts began. Vague captions about betrayal, artfully lit selfies with red eyes, quotes about healing from cruelty. The comments filled with sympathy from people who had never seen the private version of him, the version that corrected, diminished, and reminded. A few mutual friends quietly unfriended me. I felt relief. Wednesday morning, everything shifted. An email from HR. Subject, formal complaint. My hands went cold. The allegation was anonymous but specific. Misuse of company resources, a side business, erratic behavior, creating a hostile work environment. It was surgical. It was him. I didn't panic. I didn't lash out. I walked straight into my boss Richard's office and asked for HR to be present. "I want to be transparent," I said, hands steady on the table. "My ex-boyfriend and I just broke up. It was not amicable. This complaint is retaliation." I didn't speculate. I didn't dramatize. I showed them evidence. 6 months earlier, after an argument, I'd written a dated note to myself, something I'd started doing when conversations with him began to blur. "If I leave, he'll try to hurt my job." He said he'd call my boss and make me look unstable. Linda from HR went quiet. Richard leaned back slowly, absorbing it. They still had to investigate. Protocol demanded it, but the context mattered. While IT reviewed logs and access reports, I made my next move. He'd crossed a line. Thursday evening, a text came from an unknown number. Unknown. This is him. Using Sarah's phone. "I'm coming to the apartment Saturday at noon to get my things." Not a request. A demand. Perfect. Me. Saturday at noon works. Then I made 2 calls. One to a moving and storage company. The other to a high-end consignment shop. The kind that specialized in the designer furniture he loved to show off online. Friday afternoon, HR called me back. The investigation was complete. No misuse, no evidence. Complaint dismissed and documented as malicious harassment. Richard told me they had my back. The bomb he'd tried to detonate fizzled. Now it was his turn to deal with consequences. Saturday morning, the movers arrived at 9. Everything that belonged to him was already boxed. Clothes, books, toiletries, uniform cardboard. Labeled, neutral. The furniture went next. The pieces he'd insisted defined our aesthetic. The velvet couch, the marble table, the abstract painting I'd never liked. At 11:45, Elliot arrived with pizza like we'd planned. The apartment echoed. At noon sharp, the buzzer rang. He stood there with his mother and Sarah. An entourage. I opened the door. He stepped inside confidently until he saw the room. The emptiness. The boxes. "What is this?" he demanded. "Where's my furniture?" "Your personal items are boxed," I said calmly. "The furniture has been moved to storage. A consignment shop will handle the sale. You'll receive the proceeds minus fees." I handed him the folder. Itemized, contracted, final. Cassandra shrieked. He lunged for a box and threw it to the floor. "I am not being erased," he screamed. "That's enough," I said, voice low. "Get out." "This is cruel," Cassandra cried. "He's having a breakdown." "He's having a tantrum," I replied. "You have 5 minutes to remove these boxes. Any more damage, and I'll call the police." The word police snapped something into place. 5 minutes. They scrambled. When it was over, he stood in the doorway, shaking. "I loved you," he said, confused. "No," I replied. "You loved control." I closed the door. For the first time, escalation ended with me standing still. When the door closed, the silence was loud. Not the peaceful kind. the kind that presses against your ears and forces you to listen to everything you've been avoiding. I leaned my forehead against the door for a moment longer than necessary. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow, like something had been removed without anesthesia. Not love, something else, a habit, an identity, a version of myself that had survived by staying small. Elliot didn't say anything at first. He gave me space, the way emotionally intelligent people do. The pizza sat untouched on the counter. When I finally turned around, the apartment looked unfamiliar. Empty walls, open floor, the echo of footsteps that used to dictate my pace. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I nodded automatically, then stopped. "I don't know," I said honestly. That night, after he left, the adrenaline drained out of me all at once. I lay on the mattress on the floor, the bed frame had gone with the furniture, and stared at the ceiling. The victory everyone assumes comes after a clean break didn't arrive. What arrived instead was doubt. Not about leaving him, about myself. The questions crept in quietly. Was I too harsh? Did I overreact? Was there a version of this where I could have handled it better, softer, kinder, quieter? I remembered his confusion at the door, the way he'd said I loved you like a misplaced key. And for a brief, dangerous moment, guilt wrapped itself around my ribs. The next morning, I woke to messages. Not from him, from people. Mutual friends checking in with carefully neutral language. Just making sure you're okay. He's having a hard time. I hope this doesn't get messy. Messy. As if what he'd done, belittling, threatening my career, mobilizing his mother, had been tidy. I deleted them without replying. Then came the second wave. Emails from unknown addresses. Social media messages I hadn't blocked yet. Accusations disguised as concern. You changed. You let someone get in your head. This isn't who you are. The implication was clear. The woman I was becoming was unacceptable. That afternoon, HR called again. Not with bad news, but with an update. They wanted to formally log the harassment attempt and forward it to legal, given the seriousness of filing a false complaint. Hearing it described in corporate language, malicious, retaliatory, documented, hit differently. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an attack. The weight of that realization settled deep. I sat on the floor and cried then, quietly. Not because I missed him, but because I finally understood how close I'd come to losing myself without ever being hit, without ever being screamed at. That night, alone in the half-empty apartment, I replayed the past 3 years with new eyes. The corrections, the comparisons, the gratitude he demanded. I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. And the darkest part wasn't what he'd done. It was how long I'd accepted it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. But peace required something harder than anger. It required truth. The truth that leaving hadn't made me cruel. It had made me visible. And visibility, I was learning, was the most dangerous thing to someone who needed control. I went to bed that night knowing something irreversible had shifted. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. The turning point didn't come with a confrontation. It came with paperwork. On Monday morning, I sat at my kitchen counter, still eating off paper plates, still surrounded by half-assembled calm, and opened my laptop. The HR follow-up email was waiting. So was a message from legal. Everything was written in clean, neutral language. No drama, no emotion. Just facts. That's when it hit me. The story wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about records. I started documenting everything. Not obsessively, methodically. Dates, times, screenshots. Voicemails transcribed and saved, the threats he'd made months earlier, the call from his mother, the false complaint, the demand to show up unannounced, the tantrum in my living room. When you write it all down, side by side, the fog lifts. What had felt chaotic now had shape, and shape gives you leverage. That afternoon, my boss called me into his office, not for damage control, but for clarity. "I want you to know," Richard said carefully, "that what happened crossed a legal line. Our legal team contacted his company, not to punish, just to establish boundaries." I nodded. I felt calm. 2 days later, his LinkedIn status changed. Open to work. No announcement, no explanation. Just quiet fallout. That was the moment the power dynamic finally reversed. Not because I'd planned it, not because I'd tried to hurt him, but because consequences don't require intent, only truth. The consignment shop started emailing me updates. The furniture sold piece by piece. Each transaction generated an automated receipt. I forwarded the money to his account with a sterile subject line. Asset liquidation. Transfer confirmation. No message, no commentary. Silence is devastating when someone feeds on reaction. He tried once more. A long email. No insults this time. Just confusion. Nostalgia. Selective memory. I don't understand how we got here. I thought you knew I loved you. You didn't have to destroy everything. I didn't reply. Because for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. That's how I knew the shift was real. One evening, Elliot came over with takeout. We sat on the floor, backs against the wall, talking about nothing and everything. There was no pressure, no urgency. You know, he said lightly, you don't flinch anymore when your phone buzzes. I hadn't noticed. But he was right. I wasn't bracing for impact anymore. I was just present. That night, after he left, I stood in the quiet apartment and realized something profound. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was reclaiming it. I didn't need him to understand. I didn't need friends to validate it. I didn't need to be seen as kind. I needed to be free. The power hadn't come from confrontation. It had come from clarity. And clarity, once gained, doesn't disappear. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It unraveled. Quietly, methodically, without the spectacle he'd always relied on. At first, he tried to regain control through people. Sarah reached out again. Less confrontational this time, more uncertain. Her messages were shorter, careful. I didn't know everything, she wrote. He didn't tell it like that. I didn't respond. Then Ben texted, once. An apology wrapped in discomfort. He said things at home had been tense, that Sarah was exhausted, that defending someone full-time had a way of eroding the rest of your life. I read it. I archived it. I wasn't interested in mediating anyone else's collapse. The furniture continued selling, one piece at a time. Each email from the consignment shop felt strangely neutral, updates stripped of emotion. The velvet couch went first, then the table, then the painting. Every transfer I made to his account was clean, documented, impersonal. He never acknowledged them. That silence told me everything. The social media posts slowed, then stopped. His accounts went private. The audience he'd curated grew bored without fresh content. Sympathy has a short shelf life when there's no new villain to point at. A mutual friend mentioned, casually, almost apologetically, that he'd moved back in with his parents. No job, no apartment, no stage. I felt nothing when I heard it. Not satisfaction, not pity. Just distance. The real fallout came when the narrative he'd built for years finally collapsed under its own weight. People talk, patterns emerge. When someone cycles through conflicts with the same emotional signature, eventually others start recognizing it. Stories don't line up. Explanations repeat. And the person who always needs rescuing starts looking less like a victim. I noticed it in small ways. Invitations that didn't include him. Group chats that went quiet when his name came up. Friends who stopped asking me to explain myself. The pressure lifted without announcement. One evening, months later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since before the breakup. She hesitated, then said, I didn't get it at first, but I see it now. That was it. No apology, no confession. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. My life had shrunk temporarily after the breakup. Fewer people, fewer obligations, fewer emotional negotiations. But what remained felt solid. Work stabilized. I slept through the night again. My shoulders stopped living near my ears. Elliot stayed, not dramatically, not as a declaration, just consistently. He never asked me to rush, never positioned himself as a reward for leaving him. He was simply there, present, steady, uninterested in control. That, more than anything, highlighted how warped my old normal had been. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was comprehensive. Everything he'd built his identity on, admiration, influence, emotional leverage, required an audience. And audiences leave when the performance stops being entertaining. I didn't destroy his world. I stepped out of it. And without someone to dominate, it collapsed under its own weight. 6 months later, the apartment finally feels like mine. Not in the symbolic Pinterest quote way, but in the practical sense. The furniture is comfortable, chosen for living instead of impressing. There's a coffee table in the center of the room that fits the space perfectly. Not expensive, not dramatic, just right. I built it myself. The quiet no longer feels empty. It feels intentional. Elliot and I never had a defining moment where we labeled anything. We didn't need one. What we have is steady, built on mutual respect instead of control. When we disagree, no one keeps score. No one demands gratitude. That still feels like a luxury. Sometimes people ask if I regret how everything unfolded, if I wish I'd handled it more gently, if I worry about how I'm perceived. I don't. Because here's the lesson no one teaches you early enough. Love that requires you to shrink isn't love, it's management. Confidence that feeds on your silence is just insecurity in a better suit. And leaving doesn't make you cruel, it makes you honest. I didn't win by humiliating him. I didn't win by proving I was right. I won by refusing to play a role that cost me myself. The revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic. It was the slow, inevitable collapse of a world built on arrogance. I didn't push him off his pedestal. I stepped out from under it and let gravity do the rest. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, here's what I want you to know. You don't owe gratitude for being tolerated. You don't owe silence for someone else's comfort. And you don't need permission to leave a place where love feels conditional. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do isn't fight. It's walk away and live well.